Elaine, Arkansas riot, 1919. The massacre of black sharecroppers. The Elaine Massacre occurred on September 30 to October 2, 1919 at Hoop Spur in the vicinity of Elaine in rural Phillips County, Arkansas. The Elaine Massacre was by far the deadliest racial confrontation in Arkansas history and possibly the bloodiest racial conflict in the history of the United States. While its deepest roots lay in the state's commitment to white supremacy, the events in Elaine, Phillips County, stemmed from tense race relations and growing concerns about labor unions. A shooting incident that occurred at a meeting of the Progressive Farmers and Household Union escalated into mob violence on the part of the white people in Elaine and surrounding areas. Although the exact number is unknown, estimates of the number of African Americans killed by whites range into the hundreds. 5 white people lost their lives. The conflict began on the night of September 30, 1919, when approximately 100 African Americans, mostly sharecroppers on the plantations of white landowners, attended a meeting of the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America at a church in Hoop Spur, Phillips County, 3 miles north of Elaine. The purpose of the meeting, one of several by black sharecroppers in the Elaine area during the previous months, was to obtain better payments for their cotton crops from the white plantation owners who dominated the area during the Jim Crow era. Black sharecroppers were often exploited in their efforts to collect payment for their cotton crops. The union had contracted with lawyer Ulysses S. Braddon, whose son, Osier, was at this meeting. Aware of white fears of communist influence on blacks, the union posted armed guards around the church to prevent disruption and infiltration. During the meeting, 3 white men pulled up to the front of the church. One of the men asked the guards, "Going coon hunting, boys?" Gunfire erupted after the guards made no response. Though sharp debate exists as to who fired first, the guards killed W.A. Adkins, a security officer from the Missouri Pacific Railroad, and injured Charles Pratt, the deputy sheriff. The next morning, an all-white posse went to arrest the suspects. Though they encountered little opposition from the black community, the fact that blacks outnumbered whites 10-1 in this area of Arkansas resulted in great fear of an insurrection. The concerned whites formed a mob numbering up to 1,000 armed men, many of whom came from the surrounding counties and as far away as Mississippi and Tennessee. Upon reaching Elaine, the mob began killing blacks and ransacking their homes. As word of the attack spread throughout the African American community, some black residents fled while others armed themselves in defense. The mob then turned its attention to disarming those blacks who fought back. Meanwhile, local white newspapers further inflamed tensions by reporting that there were planned black uprisings. By October 2, U.S. Army troops arrived in Elaine, and the white mobs began to disperse. Federal troops rounded up and placed several hundred blacks in temporary stockades, where there were reports of torture. The men were not released until their white employers vouched for them. There was also considerable evidence that many of the soldiers sent to quell the violence engaged in the systematic killing of black residents. Within days of the initial shootout, 285 African Americans were taken from the temporary stockades to the jail in Helena, the county seat, although the jail had space for only 48. 2 white members of the Phillips County Posse, T.K. Jones and H.F. Smitty, stated in sworn affidavits in 1921 that they committed acts of torture at the Phillips County Jail and named others who had also participated in the torture. On October 31, 1919, the Phillips County grand jury charged 122 African Americans with crimes stemming from the racial disturbances. The charges ranged from murder to night riding, a charge akin to terroristic threatening, as defined by Act 112 of 1909. The trials began the next week, with John Elvis Miller leading the prosecution. White attorneys from Helena were appointed by Circuit Judge J. M. Jackson to represent the first 12 black men to go to trial. By November 5, 1919, the first 12 black men given trials had been convicted of murder and sentenced to die in the electric chair. As a result, 65 others quickly entered plea bargains and accepted sentences of up to 21 years for second-degree murder. Others had their charges dismissed or ultimately were not prosecuted. In the end, 122 blacks but no whites were charged by the Phillips County grand jury for crimes related to the riots. Their court-appointed lawyers did little in their defense despite the investigation and involvement of the NAACP. The first 12 men tried for first-degree murder were convicted and sentenced to death. As a result, 65 others entered plea bargains and accepted up to 21 years for second-degree murder. Led by black attorney Scipio Africanus Jones, the NAACP, and other civil rights groups worked towards retrials and release of the Elaine 12. Eventually they won their release, with the last of the 12 set free on January 14, 1925.